On May 1st, students at the University of Virginia held a pro-Palestinian encampment in support of the nation during their ongoing feud with Israel. This demonstration was held on grounds and consisted of both students and faculty holding signs, chanting, and eventually setting up tents when the protest carried overnight. It did, however, come to a startling end when on May 4th, armed police arrested 27 of the protesters.
I have an obligation as a president to make decisions that I think are in the best interests of the entire community.
University President Jim Ryan called in state troopers after the encampment was declared an unlawful assembly, insinuating that the protesters had displayed aggression. Now, nearly 3 months after the demonstration, Naya Uberman-Gillen offers a different perspective. She's a sociology student in the university's master's program and was working towards completing her first year of academic curriculum when she was arrested at the encampment.
We sat down with her at the same lawn where the protest took place, and where Naya shares how what was intended to remain a peaceful demonstration devolved into chaos.
When I was there was not a single moment when I felt unsafe until the armored police showed up. The night before, I was sick, I wasn't there, but they held a Shabbat ceremony within the encampment. There was singing, people brought their children, there was dancing. It was very beautiful. And when I got there in the morning, there was a tent full of food and water for students. Someone went out and got a hot lunch for everybody and brought it back. It felt like a really beautiful display of community.
The demands of the protesters were for the university to divest funds from institutions that support or profit from Israel's occupation in Palestine, and to disclose all monetary investments to its students, many of whom speculate that their tuition money is being used to help fund those very institutions.
I think that it is fair to request that they be more transparent with their students, who are A, students, but B, investors in this school by way of our tuition and taxes.
When did you notice things start to escalate that last day of the encampment in terms of involvement from the police and the authorities?
So I was there that morning, and there were university police there, and they had their walkie-talkies, and they had some zip ties for arresting students, but it was still calm. They were allowing students through with water and food for their classmates, and I didn't like that they were there, but that, I don't think, was the main problem. The main problem was when the state police came in, and I got there mid-morning, and they got there about an hour later, and there were 7 or 8 of them, and they were standing right over there in their full gear. And then they left, and we thought that they had left for good. And then they came back with probably 50 people. And all of them were bigger than me. And all of them were armed with pepper spray and rubber bullets and shields and gas masks. They offered us a chance to leave, but it's not really in my honor code to leave when my friends are being threatened by people twice their size. And the school, by sending in militarized police, had sent a clear message to the encampment that they were not going to communicate with us. Beyond even meeting demands, they weren't even going to offer us a conversation. Conversations don't start with calling in militarized cops.
I was hit on my forehead, with 2 police shields several times, not once.
Senna Kaplan, another student who was arrested at the encampment, endured physical assault from authorities as they began to detain students.
I went in one of the tents just to wash my face because pepper gas was really close, but I couldn't do that because when I was inside the tent, 2 or 3 officers came and they tried to take the tent, and I was inside.
The tents used by the protesters became the subject of controversy, with Jim Ryan stating that their presence on grounds was a violation of a long-standing university policy, which prohibits all tents that do not have a permit. But supporters of the encampment quickly discovered that the total prohibition of unauthorized tents was only added to the list of university policies that very morning. The previous list of university policies, which had been in place less than 12 hours before, detailed an exemption for recreational tents that are used for camping, which would have given protesters more leeway to maintain their assembly. Outrage from students and faculty of the university spread on social media, many of whom claiming that Jim Ryan changed the tent policy in such haste so that he could justify calling the authorities on his students.
That's inconsistent with the policy, which says that all tents need to be permitted.
President Ryan, however, pushed back on this narrative during a virtual town hall held on May 7th, where he claims that the sole reasoning behind changing the tent policy the morning of Saturday, May 4th, was to simply clarify the original intended meaning that the policy was supposed to convey.
So someone on our team, and I'm not sure this was the right judgment, at 9:30 or so on Saturday, decided to remove that so that those rules were consistent with policy.
But later that day, University Police Chief Timothy Longo cited the revised tent policy when he called state troopers on the encampment. They arrived at the scene armed with pepper spray and M4 assault rifles, grappling with protesters before taking several into custody.
And they took us to Charlottesville jail, city jail. We were kept there like more than 8 hours, and I had a medical issue, so I asked the officers to bring a nurse for me, the nurse working in the jail. I asked the nurse to bring my medication, and they said, like, we cannot give you any medication or even water because you are not under our custody. You are under the state police custody.
And in the midst of this police intervention, members of the encampment were also met with jeering and shouting from counter-protesters, as well as a slew of student bystanders.
What's even more compelling is that people have seen videos on social media circulating since the encampment of those counter-protesters cheering on the police, cheering on authorities. I imagine that's probably pretty traumatic for you. What is it like to see all those videos now?
For me personally, I am Jewish, and my family, my great-grandfather escaped from Poland right before the war broke out. He was the only person in his entire family to survive, and that's really colored my family's history. And so when I look at that, and I look at the way that Israel is portraying the Jewish people in this ongoing genocide, I find it really alarming and really hurtful. And even more than I was disturbed by the police action, I was disturbed to see my classmates and my schoolmates cheering them on as they beat up their fellow UVA students. I found that to be just so horrific and so disgusting.
How would you say that intimidation was felt amongst you and also the other students who were there at the encampment?
I expected harsh treatment from the police. I did not expect my classmates to cheer them on.
In the aftermath of this altercation, supporters of the protest have expressed that the level of force used against the protesters was unnecessary, nor does it contribute to the lasting legacy of the university.
Looking back through UVA's history, there has been several different protests. In the 60s, there was a very, very large anti-Vietnam War protest, and also the Coat and Tie Rebellion, which was protesting segregation on campus and the unfair treatment of the few women students that were allowed in at that point. And in neither of those cases were armored riot police called. In the large May Day protest, which was almost 53 years ago to the day of our arrest, thousands of students gathered on the lawn, and the President Shannon at the time, came out and held an impromptu speech with the students and spoke to them and offered to draft a letter for them to sign with him, which he would hand deliver to the senators, stating the university's disagreement with the Vietnam War. And so, to me, that is the precedence that's been set by this school, which is that First Amendment rights are allowed and students are allowed to protest for what they believe in.
My heart broke because of what took place. To the condemnable call of the Virginia State Police in full gear and the use of excessive force to terrorize our students.
And in an outpouring of solidarity, university faculty members called for an independent review of the school's police response to the encampment. Then a handful of faculty members, so appalled with the school's treatment of the protesters, submitted letters of resignation.
In talking to the faculty in my department, they have been just so wonderful. And I've been really overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from the people in my department who didn't have to come to court with me and didn't have to come to my informal resolution meeting with me and did all of those things and came to the jail afterward with food and water and took care of my boyfriend who was waiting and couldn't get in contact with me.
In the events following her arrest, Naya was unable to finish her first year as a grad student the way she had originally planned, having to take an incomplete in one of her classes. Still, she says that her troubles pale in comparison to the issue at hand, which is the humanitarian crisis she continues to advocate for.
I saw a video come out of Gaza about a month ago where students were singing for student protesters and thanking student protesters for speaking up for them.
We appreciate it very much. We truly love them. They have stand with us. No one did that.
And it made me cry. It was so beautiful and so heartbreaking that this is all we can do. The protest has become the story, but the protest is not the story. The genocide in Gaza is the story, and we are just a part of that.
As of today, several of the arrested students have faced criminal charges by the University Judiciary Committee. Those of them who were meant to graduate in May have had their degrees withheld until their trials, which are set for later this year.